Aristocratic worldview and the conservative counterrevolution. André Guimarães Augusto. Abstract. The article identifies the ideological foundations of the conservative counterrevolution in the aristocratic worldview, especially in the work of Julius Evola. A reference to the new global extreme right. Such an aristocratic worldview starts from an ontology of two worlds, where a superior spiritual world and an inferior material world are distinguished. In this ideology, concrete history is replaced by myths of the hidden and permanent war between good and evil, and of the fall of the course of history as a decline in traditional values. The conservative counterrevolution, to be led by a spiritual elite, aims to eliminate disorder and reestablish normality. Julius Evola, Men Among the Ruins p. identified with the timeless values of authority, obedience and hierarchy, emanating from the upper world in a new institutional form. The article indicates two trends that lead to the transformation of this worldview into a contemporary political ideology. Firstly, the need to eliminate disorder by spreading a pseudo-revolutionary ideology based on myth and criticism of the decadence of contemporary society. Secondly, the need for the ruling class to reestablish normality of capitalist accumulation through the imposition of the values of hierarchy and authority as supports for increasing the extraction of surplus value. Keywords: aristocracy, conservatism and ideology, aristocratic worldview, and conservative counterrevolution. Abstract. This paper analyzed the ideological framework of the conservative counterrevolution. This framework is identified in an aristocratic worldview showed in Julius Evola works. The aristocratic world vision is grounded in a two-worlds ontology, whereas distinguished a superior spiritual world and a inferior material world. In this worldview, history is replaced by two myths, the myth of a cult war among good and evil, and the myth of the fall, the development of history as a decline of traditional values. The conservative counterrevolution is aimed at eliminating a newly emerged disorder and at reestablishing a state of normalcy. Evola, Men Among the Ruins, p. This state or normalcy is identified with the values of authority, obedience and hierarchy originated in the superior world. In the article is pointed at two tendencies of contemporary capitalism that lead to the transformation of this world vision in an ideology. The first one is the necessity of eliminate the disorder through a reactionary ideology with semblance of revolutionary. The second one is the necessity to reestablish the normalcy of the capitalista accumulation through an aristocratic ideology of resigned obedience for works and unrestrained authority. Keywords: aristocracy, conservatism, ideology. This article deals with the conservative counter-revolution proposed by Julius Evola in his book Men Among the Ruins. Julius Evola professes the traditionalist philosophy which, initiated by René Guénon at the beginning of the 20th century, professes the resumption of perennial spiritual values as a reaction to what is identified as the decadence of the West. Traditionalism is thus part of a long tradition of reactionary and irrationalist thought that began as a reaction to the French Revolution, and whose greatest political expression has, until now, been fascism. Julius Evola was a philosopher born in Rome in 1898, into an aristocratic family. After getting involved with painting and poetry, participating in the futurist and Dadaist movements, Evola linked to mysticism and occultism and traditionalist philosophy. Evola was admired by Mussolini and published the newspaper Sangue e Spirito under his auspices. Evola also traveled to Nazi Germany, and he obtained support for his newspaper, not hiding his admiration for the SS. Despite involvement with fascism, Evola asserts himself as a right-wing critic of the regime. Evola saw elements in fascism, populists and leftists who should be eliminated in favor of ineffectively. Aristocratic. Evola's work became a reference for post-World War II neo-fascist movements and began to gain relevance in the last 20 years among the European and American right. The proposals for a conservative counter-revolution as an elite movement that restores traditional values and reorganizes political institutions and the economy have increasingly become a movement of significant political and ideological influence, especially after the 2008 crisis. Evola is a reference for Steve Bannon, chief strategist for American President Donald Trump, and Alain de Benoist, a philosopher who is a reference in the movements of the European New Right with Marine Le Pen's National Front. In Brazil, Evola's influence in the ideological field occurs mainly through the astrologer Olavo de Carvalho. Ontology of two worlds in history is myth. Evola starts from the doctrine of two natures, 1989 Revolt, p. The first of these natures consists of the physical order of the mortal, the visible, and the tangible, in a word for material nature. The second nature is that of the metaphysical order of the immortal and the invisible, in short, the spiritual nature. These two natures, or two poles of existence, constitute reality and are organized too. Spiritual intuition is translated by the formation of symbols through imagination. According to Evola, traditional man has a psychic perception relatively independent of physical perception. This psychic perception is collected by an imaginative faculty, 1989, p. The imaginative faculty does not reproduce images of the sensible, but translates impressions into symbolic dramatizations, 1989, p. The symbolic dramatizations produced by the imaginative faculty constitute myths. Evola performs an inversion here in which myths are the expression of a superior reality, of a supra-reality, while the world perceived by the senses is a great symbol, because it presents invisible realities in a sensitive form, 1989, p. In this way, Evola demeans knowledge of history. All historically and scientifically valid material is the material with the least value. Where what is considered a myth, legend, or saga is devoid of historical truth and demonstrative force, ultimately acquires, and precisely for this reason, a superior validity and becomes a source of knowledge more real and more certain, p. In an inversion, the value of history is given by what it can provide as myth, 1989, p. And myth is what provides knowledge of history. It is precisely myth and anti-history that lead to knowledge most complete in history, p. The foundation of Evola's replacement of history by myth lies in his ontological dualism. The world of becoming, the lower region in Evola's ontological dualism, is the region of history and temporality. Myth, in turn, is the proper form of a super-rational and super-historical content, 1989, p. Corresponding to the region of being, the superworld. Myth refers to the world of being and operates in a super-historical time, a transcendent time. In this way, in the traditional worldview to which the superworld of the region of being corresponds, the empirical time would be ordered from above and in a hierarchical manner. Thus, the view of the property, depth in the current of becoming corresponds to a qualitative temporality divided in rhythms. In this way, history is no longer linear, and the irreversibility of time is replaced by myth of cycles that, when repeated, follow each other like a series of eternities, 1989, p. A concrete empirical history is thus explained and determined by the traditional categories of the supra world, and some real historical facts and characters may have partially or five. Not the forms and institutions of the past, but to the principles of which these forms and institutions have been a particular expression, suitable for a specific period of time and in a specific geographic area. Evola. 1989, p. Aristocratic social theory. Evola's dualist ontology includes links between the upper region, the superworld of being, and the lower region, the world of becoming. The first of these ways is the creation of bridges or pathways between the upper world and the lower world. According to Evola, there are elements in the world of becoming that perform the function of pontifex or bridge builder between the two worlds, 1989, p. It is through bridges or pathways that the superworld appears and is present in the world of becoming. These bridges are an immanent transcendence and reproduce in the world of becoming the elements that characterize the world of being, stability, universality, and absolute character. For Evola, these bridges were constituted by royalty, the law, the state, and the empire. Such institutions in the world would originate in the supersensible world, come from above, and have it as their purpose, that is, they direct themselves upwards, 1989, p. The traditional nature of these institutions, according to Evola, is what will form the basis of their political ideology. The second link between the superworld and the sensitive world, according to Evola, is the causal relationship from the first to the second. According to the traditional view, as defended by Evola, the visible inferior world is an effect of the superior world. The physical plane only contains effects and nothing is produced below that has not already been produced in the beyond, in the invisible, 1989, p. It is through these two links between the upper and lower worlds and through the myth of man it is essential that Evola defends the hierarchical character of society. The hierarchical organization tradition was expressed in the caste system. Castes would be explained by the relationship of causality between the upper and lower worlds. Birth would not be something merely casual, but an effect of a cause from the higher world. One was born into a certain caste because transcendently, one already has a certain spirit. The hierarchical character of castes would analogically replicate the metaphysical hierarchy of the two worlds. Thus, the lower castes, the workers and servants, would be the furthest from the superworld and closer to the material world, representing the impersonal energies of matter. 8. Aristocracy in the traditional world did not have a simply secular and political character, but had its basis in spirituality. Evola, 1989 p. The ethical element is fundamental in the transformation of Evola's irrationalist philosophy into an ideology capable of offering a favorable response to the bourgeoisie despite its anti-bourgeois rhetoric, as will be seen later for issues of contemporary class struggle. Every idea, regardless of its validity, as a correct reflection of the reality of its truth or falsehood, while it is just a product of an individual's thought, is not yet an ideology. No matter how socially widespread it is, Lukács, 2013, p. An idea only becomes an ideology to the extent that it performs the function of offering a response to concrete conflicts, of making human social praxis conscious and capable of acting. Lukács, 2013, p. 465. Aristocratic ethics is the element of Evola's irrationalist philosophy that offers a response to present-day conflicts and thereby transforms itself into ideology. Evola's objective through traditionalist philosophy and the conservative counter-revolution that derives from it is to restore the real hierarchy of values. Evola, 1989 p. In this way, aristocratic ethics are placed at the center of traditionalist philosophy. The traditional principles of state sovereignty, authority, and hierarchy have, according to Evola, the character of values of absolute morality in public life. They are imperative principles that require direct intrinsic recognition. Evola, 1989 p. To be implemented, such principles require that individuals who recognize them do not give up on them internally. Evola, 1989 p. The most important sphere in the hidden war is the internal one, according to Evola, the world of thoughts. This is where, according to the author, we must recognize the subtle influences that try to suggest ideas and reactions to us in certain situations. Evola, 1989 p. In this way, Evola places the ideological intention of his traditionalist philosophy as central. In other words, his philosophy is directed at the consciousness of other men with the aim of provoking in them a decision between alternatives posed by social conflicts. And this alternative, as will be seen later, consists of the refusal of social transformation towards a more socialized content towards communism and the maintenance and reinforcement of social hierarchies and differences. Political ideology and conservative counter-revolution. Evola's political ideology is founded on the ontology of two worlds and his aristocratic social theory. According to Evola, politics is not based on or derived from the economy or society. 10 person differs qualitatively. A person is an individual differentiated by his qualities and a series of attributes that distinguish him from all others, in other words, attributes that make him fundamentally unequal. 1972, p. 135. It is on the principle of inequality and the notion of a person linked to it that Evola bases the hierarchical idea in general and the existence and need for an elite that embodies the principles of authority and order. Imperium. In this way, being a person is not a uniform quality or a uniformly distributed quality, nor dignity that is equal in everyone. 1972, p. As the quality of being a person is not uniform and is present in different hierarchical degrees among individuals, some represent the person's maximum achievement. This maximum achievement, the absolute person, is given by the quality of complete control of the powers inherent to man. 1972, p. 140. That is, the absolute person is the one who has the ability to dominate himself. 1972, p. 141. The Imperium, 1972, p. It is on the hierarchy of the person that Evola bases the principle of obedience. If the absolute person who constitutes the elite that represents the principle of Imperium is formed by those who control themselves, this gives them the ability to control others. On the other hand, those who do not have the ability to control themselves must find a master outside themselves. 1972, p. In this way, obedience complements the principle of authority and is justified by a hierarchy of an essentially ethical nature. According to Evola, superiority and power go together, and power is based on superiority. Superiority, in turn, is connected with qualities. 1972, p. Obedience, in turn, is valued positively by Evola. The obedience of the lower castes is, according to Evola, their means of participating in the superior world. The lower castes are incapable of being their own master. Unlike the higher castes, those most removed from the spiritual world, the lower castes linked to the world of work, would have in their subordination to the higher castes an approach, a bridge, with the upper world. Obedience is the means for members of the lower caste to learn self-control, p, and would be a necessity for inferiors, p. This subordination would not be experienced in a passive and external way, but should be internalized by groups located at the base of the social hierarchy as 12. More important than the forms of economic organization proposed by Evola, which seek to correct the errors of fascist corporatism, is its central ethical element for its constitution as an ideology. The return to normality, the restoration of traditional principles in the economy, means restoring the dependence of the economic factor in relation to internal moral factors. 1989, p. In these terms, the ultimate purpose of the corporate idea is to effectively elevate the low activities connected to production and material concern. 1989, p. To an immediately higher hierarchical level, that of the warrior caste. In other words, Evola proposes that material production be organized according to the same principles as the military hierarchy. According to Evola, the corporate system reflects in the economy the clear, virile, and personalized ethos of the warrior. Evola, 1989, p. In the new corporate system, the capitalist assumes the role of responsible leader, technical administrator. Evola, 1989, p. Being respected and obeyed by the workers almost on the terms of loyalty and military solidarity. Evola, 1989, p. 207. Surrounded by loyal workers, free from union control and proud to belong to their company. Evola, 1989, p. The capitalist's authority in companies is imposed from above and unquestionable, as in Imperium. In this system, workers would be responsible for discipline, loyalty, and obedience like that of soldiers in a military hierarchy. The workers would commit themselves with the spirit of sacrifice of the soldier, as in Nazism. Evola, 1989, p. Workers would be responsible for conforming to the hierarchy in accordance with the traditional social ethics of realizing their own being and achieving their own perfection within the fixed frameworks defined by the nature of each person and the group to which they belonged. P. This social ethics has a universal and ahistorical character that is a metaphysical ethics. Thus, the lower castes, those linked to the activity of the world of work, should live in accordance with their metaphysical nature, with a feeling of joy, disinterest, and pride in their own profession. Evola, 1989, p. The fundamental element in the transformation of Evola's traditionalist philosophy into ideology was thus found in conformist obedience for workers and unrestricted authority for capitalists and governments, more than a well-defined and executable economic program or a form of political organization with clear contours and objectives. The ideology of conservative counter-revolution mobilizes praxis for the acceptance of conditions of inequality prevailing social standards through aristocratic ethics. On the other hand, traditionalist ideology gives a revolutionary appearance to its contents, reactionaries, thus opening the ideological path for the creation of new forms of domination. Revolutionary appearance and reactionary content of traditionalist ideology meets the need of a preventive counter-revolution. The possibility, even if merely latent, that a response at the crisis situation leads to a communist revolution, it is already fought in the field of ideology. The economic program proposed by Evola highlights who the conservative counter-revolution is aimed at: communism. The advent of socialist movements in the Russian Revolution are interpreted in a mythical way by Evola based on the hidden war of a metaphysical nature between the forces of order and the forces of chaos. Communism would represent the ultimate, but not final, victory of the forces of chaos. Both the French and Russian revolutions are effects of invisible agents. Evola, 1989, p. In a mystical way, revolutions are seen by Evola not as a reaction of men towards changing certain conditions, but as products of a catagogic power, a demonic element that causes individual stasis. The myth of hidden war is complemented by the thesis of caste regression. Here communism is seen as an involution, a sign of decadence. The regression here refers to all civilization and is visible at the level of ethics. Here communism would elevate the slave principle, work. In communism, power tends to pass to the last of the traditional castes, to that of the burdened slave and the mass man. P. In Evola's hierarchical worldview, communism represents the triumph of inferior values over superior ones and therefore must be eliminated so that the metaphysical hierarchy is reestablished. It is evident here that the hidden war gives a mythical and metaphysical guise to the class struggle, thus serving to hide it from consciousness. In history turned into myth and in the use of analogies, communism is seen as a direct product of democracy and liberalism. Both move in the same direction, that of regression, and represent the end of a cycle. Representative democracy would mean an inversion of metaphysical values, as the demos represented by the rulers would represent the inferior forces of chaos, while in the metaphysical hierarchy the rulers do not represent the people, but the superior world. The majority principle in democracies would represent the victory of the lower social stratum, as the majority would always be on their side. Liberalism and democracy would have led to the primacy of the masses by putting the individual in the person's place, and along this path they would have led to the collectivist ideology of socialism. So, there would be the deproletarianization of the worker is assumed not only in the proposals of the corporate principle mentioned above, but also in the deproletarianization of the way of life. Evola, 1989, p. This is a criticism of work. The glorification of work as an ethical value and an essential duty. Evola, 1989, p. If, in the corporate principle, deproletarianization is achieved with the worker reproducing the ascetic discipline and the soldier's loyalty to the entrepreneurial capitalist. In the ethical field, it is the conformity with one's own material situation, achieved by the worker's austere way of life, that brings about this deproletarianization. Austerity and the renunciation of improving material conditions, such as the deproletarianization of society, also refer to the state, which should adopt it as an ethical principle. Evola, 1989, p. It is also in the field of company organization that the oriented character of Evola's traditionalist ideology towards a future mode of capitalism becomes visible. The organic reintegration of companies appears through socialization proposals, profit sharing, and the involvement of workers in company management. But these proposals have a political character and are not intended to improve the material conditions of workers' lives. Regarding profit sharing, Evola proposes that losses should also be shared, and that the amount of profit shared in large companies should not be greater than the base salary. More importantly, Evola proposes the implementation of a differential wage determination free from union intervention. Evola, 1989, p. Evola also proposes the transformation of the worker into a small business owner through the distribution of non-transferable shares, but within the limits necessary for the maintenance of correct hierarchical relationships. Evola, 1989, p. 229. As for participation in administration, it should be restricted to personal and immediate interests, limited to working conditions. Evola, 1989, p. Proposals for the organic reintegration of companies through socialization reveal their conservative character beneath the apparently progressive rhetoric. If most of them have already been implemented in different forms in the period between Evola's work and the current period, their direction can already be perceived. On the immediate level, the progressive weakening of the unions in the form of autonomous organization of workers and their progressive integration in companies. This is another general meaning of the deproletarianization of work. This has a political character that consists of reinforcing the hierarchy and loyalty of workers to the company and not instituting democratic principles of participation in the management of the company and a progressive socialization of ownership. 18. World of the masses and the pure economy. Evola, 1989, p. Nationalism here constitutes the Evola's traditionalism is opposed to nationalism seen as a product of the principles of the French Revolution and a degradation of the traditional principles of state sovereignty imperium. The nation would be something opposed to the state because it is based on naturalistic and biological principles and not political. Evola, 1989, p. 127. The nation would only be compatible with the principles of the traditional state if understood as a spiritual nation, as a bond of a group of men sharing the same idea and loyalty, possessing the same objective, and obeying the same internal law reflected in a specific social and political ideal. Evola, 1989, p. 129. The defense of the right of the nation is thus adopted by Evola's traditionalism as a means of affirming the principle of difference of a given human group. Evola, 1989, p. And not as an end in itself. Evola's hierarchical worldview places the nation as above humanity, but as a means that serves another end, that of the state controlled by an elite, the one that would form the spiritual nation, independent of material ties such as territory. Nationalism is thus only a first step towards the reconstitution of the state along traditional lines through the creation of subsequent degrees of differentiation, of discipline and hierarchies within the national state. In this way, the state is created from the substance of the nation. Evola, 1989, p. The proposals for reorganizing the state along traditional lines made by Evola are a possible response to the needs of reconstituting bourgeois forms of domination. By contesting the legitimacy of bourgeois democracy, it thus points to a current awareness that the present way of life cannot continue. On the other hand, in doing so, it legitimizes forms of domination with increasingly authoritarian content and an aristocratic nature. Final considerations. The current economic and political crisis situation has created the conditions for the rise of movements neoconservatives, with ideological content of a reactionary and aristocratic nature. Such ideologies are spreading in a period in which it is no longer possible to continue as before, but we still do not have the answers to the questions posed by the concrete situation. The spontaneous reaction and the growing awareness that the conditions of current capitalism can no longer continue as they were 20 exists. They also open the possibility of responding to the concrete situation that leads to the development of society towards greater socialization content towards communism. If such a perspective seems distant in the immediacy of the bourgeois political institution, the ideological combat remains open. Although history does not progress in a linear and teleological way, solutions with a reactionary ideological content do not regress the objective conditions of increasing socialization posed by capitalism itself. It is under this contradiction that the possibility of a left-wing response to the concrete problems of the current situation opens up. Bibliography: Evola J. Revolt Against the Modern World. Don Quixote, Lisbon, 1989. Men Among the Ruins. Inner Traditions. Vermet, 2002. Lukács G. The Assault on Reason. Culture Fund, Mexico, 1959. Aristocratic Conception and Democratic Conception of the World. In The Young Marx and Other Philosophical Writings. Editora UFRJ, Rio de Janeiro, 2009. Ontology of the Social Being. Val. I. Boitempo, Sao Paulo, 2012. Ontology of Social Being. Val. Zhao. Boitempo, Sao Paulo, 2013.